Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The Army is warning that an amendment in the House Armed Services Committee's version of the 2026 Defense Policy Bill could discourage technology companies from building data centers on military installations and jeopardize the service's modernization efforts. Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis is here with more details. Anastasia, good to see you.
Hi, Terry.
Talk to me about this amendment. I mean, there are many amendments in the NDAA. What's this particular one about?
Yes, so this amendment is part of the HASC chairman's mark. It was introduced by Republican Congressman Corey Mills, and the amendment is titled Restrictions on Data Facility Equipment Placed on Facilities Leased from the Defense Department. So let me give you and the audience a little bit of background. In 2025, President Donald Trump signed an executive order to speed up AI data center development by allowing private companies to use federally owned land to build those data centers on. And the statute in the executive order allows the Pentagon to lease its unused or underutilized land to private companies. The idea is kind of to bring money in by leasing this land, but also military installations would be able to take advantage of the infrastructure these companies are building as the military accelerates its use of AI. The Pentagon said that the companies would be responsible for pretty much everything, for financing, building, operating, maintaining those facilities, and it would be at no cost to taxpayers. So when it comes to this particular amendment, and there were two amendments that were introduced, we'll talk about the second one, but when it comes to Mills' amendment, what he basically proposed, and it passed, was the lawmakers want to bar the Defense Department from leasing its land to private companies to build data centers unless these companies agree not to install or operate data facility equipment that contains components manufactured or tied to countries like China, Russia, Iran, or North Korea. And the restrictions would apply to components such as printed circuit boards, advanced semiconductors, chipsets, and other components that the Defense Department deems a national security risk.
So what is the Army's concern with that?
Yeah, so just again, a little bit of background. The Army is currently negotiating with Carlyle Group, and that's one of the world's largest private equity firms, to build this massive data center at Fort Bliss in Texas. And they're also working with CyrusOne, and that's a company jointly owned by KKR and BlackRock, to build another massive center in Utah. They're also planning 2 additional data centers at Fort Bragg in North Carolina and at Fort Hood in Texas. So what the Army is saying here is like, look, the domestic industrial base just doesn't produce some of the components needed for data centers. And this type of restriction creates what they call a federal land penalty that imposes requirements on companies that build facilities on military installations that they wouldn't face building and like elsewhere. They're saying if a company builds outside its gates, they don't face those rules. If they build inside, they do, which means that this will drive companies away along with billions of dollars in investment. And also having this infrastructure on military land gives the military access to some of the computing power. So the Army is saying that if this provision passes and becomes law, the Army would lose access to this power and data infrastructure. And then that would require them to either fund those multi-billion projects with taxpayer dollars or kind of fall behind their adversaries.
Is the Army the only military service that's pursuing this line of construction?
Nope. The Air Force is also considering 5 data centers at different bases across the country.
So have they brought these concerns to their members of Congress?
Yes, they have. They said that they've shared their technical feedback on how this provision will impact them and their leasing authorities. I asked what's the ideal outcome for the Army would be. Would it be the removal of the provision? Would it be changing the language, etc.? The Army basically said that it wants Congress to adopt a policy that secures its systems without hamstringing its partnerships. So they basically said that when a commercial business on federal land provides services to the government, they already fall under strict existing rules. So they just want Congress to incentivize these companies coming in and building their data centers rather than creating barriers for them.
Is the biggest concern just that the domestic supply chain doesn't exist for these, or are there other issues?
This is one of the bigger concerns, but another one, of course, and this is an amendment that Congressman John Garamendi pushed for. It failed to pass, but he was talking about the fact that supply security concerns are not the only concerns when it comes to having data centers on military installations. He says that these data centers, as he puts it, extraordinary consumers of both energy and water, which could impact those installations and strain their resources as they support military operations. So he raised concerns about energy and water consumption, light, noise pollution, encroachment on training operations, and physical and supply chain security. A facility that supports both commercial customers and government users does raise a lot of questions about access controls, about personnel vetting, about, like we discussed, supply chain security, about separation between military and commercial activity. Here's Congressman Garamendi.
What we require in this amendment is transparency. What is the energy issues? What are the water issues as it applies to the base? Is there backup power? Is there light, noise, pollution that would harm the utility of that base? Is there encroachment on training and operations and the physical and supply chain of security? That's it. I'm not saying no. Now, we all know that data centers are a big NIMBY issue in America. Not in my backyard. I'm sure none of us are into that here at this hearing, although I kind of heard some people talk sort of towards that. Fine, don't put them in my backyard, put them over there on the military bases. I don't have a problem with that as long as the military base is not degraded.
Anastasia, what's the next step here?
Of course, this is many rounds of votes away from becoming law. So we'll see what comes out of the Senate Armed Services Committee. We'll see what comes out of the final version of the NDAA. But, there are a lot of questions. After all, this is different from a commercial center to be located outside the gates of the military installations rather than inside a military installation. There are a number of concerns, like we discussed, and the lawmakers and the military will have to contend with those.
That's Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis. Thanks for bringing us this story.
Thank you, Terry.
You can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com.